All right.
And we're live, Collective Dismal and I, for the second time, I think. And this
Possibly third.
third,
Possibly
and
third, if my memory serves me correctly.
yes. And
We
this
had a
time,
little a little scheduling delay. Sometimes I forget people live outside of North America.
yes. But it's a weekend and I'm fairly flexible. And this time we're going to be talking about meta ethics, which is a particular interest of yours, as you're a philosopher. Is that right?
I don't know as meta ethics are of a particular interest to me. I think they're necessary though. I'm more concerned about your meta ethics and the worldview you present and the extent to which you feel that it's necessary to present one in order to kind of sell people on your prescriptions, your worldview. This was sort of like a back and forth we had a little bit in text chat,
Mm-hmm.
and I figured it was easier to just come on here and flesh it out in a voice recorded conversation. But
Yes. And and well, I suppose the difference is really well, in the olden days, people just had to be told stories, right? And if they like the story, then they'll accept the values and the rules that go with it. And if they don't, of course, they'll just reject it. And these days, um, well, people seem to expect to read a philosophical essay, and that's probably not as persuasive. And I think, fundamentally, people are still into stories and narratives, and whether they like it or not.
yeah, I like how you set that up because there's a lot to kind of unpack there. So I would strongly agree that back in the days, people did kind of just need a cogent story told to them, and if it sounded well and it suited their interests, they would adopt it. And that was that. I think the playing field is a little bit different nowadays, especially with modernity and Nietzsche's declaration of the death of God. And I think that what he was sort of ushering in was this new like scientific paradigm where the burdens of proof they can no longer be dogmatic post enlightenment. People will they really want to challenge the foundational assumptions of your worldview and your belief system. Everybody's a skeptic now. Everybody's a critic now. They're not. And I'll just say before I kind of let you respond to this, I think ultimately that science in and of itself is just another one of these stories. I'm not really a proponent of scientific realism, but science is very good at hiding the ball and presenting itself as otherwise. It's not just another story amongst the rest that have been told. It's something objective. It's something that's not, sensitive to people's opinions of it. It's, you know what I mean? And I think that although I don't necessarily share all of your convictions as I understand them, I do think that if what you present were to catch on and gain traction, it would be a lot better, in my opinion, than whatever's going on now in the world. And so I would like to see it succeed to the extent that it can.
Oh,
But
that's
I do,
nice.
but I do worry that, to be frank, you slough off philosophy sometimes. You kind of downplay the need for like this very pedantic type of philosophizing and try.
Um,
Sorry, you can go. You can go.
well, I was wondering what you mean by the pedantic kind of philosophizing. Do you mean arguing like a lawyer or talking like a philosopher, which is, I guess, slightly different? I mean,
So
saying
I
the word
heard,
normative, that kind of drives me wild, or saying epistemological and
well,
ontological, that kind of
even
thing. Is that what you mean?
even setting the jargon aside for the moment, like I heard a snippet some months ago from um, a panel that you either hosted or were involved in, where they were kind of quarreling about philosophy of mind and how to best understand it. And you sort of said, who cares? Like, we know what mind is. Like, get on with it.
Yes, I'm saying the mind exists in the brain exists in the skull, and therefore, um, while we can talk about ideal forms and ideas floating around, it's impossible without people talking about these things, because it's only then that these ideas come alive, when we support them and oppose them, and then they come into being. But if there are no people to talk about ideas and oppose them and support them, then these ideas are worthless, in a dead universe, for example, where everything is
They're
dead.
just, yeah, castles in the sky, kind of.
Mm.
I'll,
So,
I'll give you. I'll give you, without going like too far afield from the point of this conversation, but there's this big case that's in the news now about the woman who killed her children. I'm sure you've come
yes,
across
Lindsay
it.
Clancy.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, understanding exactly the nature of the mind and how to understand that, whether the mind is a separate substance from the brain, whether it's one and the same, like, just however we choose to look at it will have real life ramifications for how to interpret the liability and the guilt and stuff on the ground level in everyday goings on in cases like that, right? So I do think that all this hyper pedantic uh, philosophizing stuff, it does trickle down to, it does have a bit of a trickle down effect to where the metaphysical assumptions that a person like tacitly presupposes will have real world consequences for the way they assign guilt and blame and things like this. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, because I think people are just overdiagnosed with their neurosis. In the olden days, if you were neurotic, you tried to hide it. You wouldn't be, boasting that I've got complex PTSD. I'm bipolar. I've got ADHD. I mean, people would just know to shut up about it and mask it, and that's what it's meant to be, instead of boasting about it.
For sure. So I don't know. I kind of wanted to. I think you thought that in me coming on, I was maybe going to attempt to give like some type of lecture about meta ethics, but I kind of wanted
Yes.
to like press you a little bit actually,
Okay.
because I mean, to the extent that I understand what you offer up as an alternative to the kind of prevailing worldview, right? I let me see if I can flesh out your ideas without like straw manning or misrepresenting them.
Hmm.
But you think that by adopting the Noahide laws and things like this, we can essentially put, I guess, Western civilization back on track.
Yeah,
Would that be
restore the
fair to say?
patriarchy. Um, make it a rule that you can only have children if you've got a marriage license, licensing you to have sex and children, and then the degeneracy problem will go away. Because it's like, even non-human animals, they have rules. Like, you can't just have sex with each other randomly. So I guess in a herd of deer, the stag gets to have sex with all the females, and and
I'm
and,
getting a bit
and
of
he
audio
has
crackling. I hate to cut
difficulty.
you off. I'm getting a bit of crackling on the audio. I'm not sure if I've never used Restream before. I don't know.
You are crackling. Am I crackling too?
Yeah, you're crackling for me. Do you have like a live chat open that you could consult with or something to see if it's
Yeah, it is quite bad, isn't it? I will close down all my windows, or we can start again with, if it doesn't go away, I don't actually know what I can do to
maybe I can
change it.
leave and come
We
back.
can go on StreamYard, maybe.
Maybe I can leave and come back and I'll try that real quick.
Okay, I've closed all my windows, and hopefully, all right. Well, thank you, disgraced liberal. Yes, it is him. It is CD that's crackling.
Okay, microphone
Hi.
check.
Yeah, you're the one crackling according to the chat.
Interesting. Okay, maybe I'm just a phone guy, so
Hmm.
maybe I will.
Maybe you need to put your earbuds in or something.
Give me 1 second. Hold on.
Sure. Well, it's good to um, have somebody who knows about mic gain settings and work out what the problem is. Sorry about that. So I'm really pleased that CD and I are finally getting it together to discuss a bit of philosophy. Oh dear, you're
Yeah.
crackling again. Disgraced Liberal
Okay, let me
says,
see if there's some kind of a setting here where I can adjust my audio within this.
okay, I am going to click on settings and then I will click on audio and I don't know what to. Oh, I hear myself now. Echo cancellation. Should I unclick that? And then I've
Okay,
got
can you hear me?
um, yes, I can
Okay,
hear
I think I
myself too.
resolved it. I think I resolved it.
Oh, cool. Right.
I just had to go into settings and change some things. I've never used this before, so.
Well, you're much better
Um.
now, but I hear myself.
Okay, I think we're back on track. So, yeah. I guess just kind of trying to pick up where we were. When you say that you are agnostic, when asked the ultimate question, like, do you believe in these things, or do you just view them as like mere practical solutions, or merely adopting them for their kind of pragmatic utility and things like that? I
Well,
worry that the lack of like foundational commitments may cause certain people to, let's say, refrain from following and adopting what it is that you're trying to offer them.
I I call myself agnostic because there's an echo. I hear my own voice, which is quite distracting. I wonder if others can hear my voice
Okay, let's
too.
get this. I'll get this completely sorted out before we like invest in going further. Just give me a moment.
Hmm.
Okay, how about now?
It seems okay.
Now the crackling's back.
There is more crackling and more echoing. Mm-mm.
My bad. I'll take responsibility for that. I don't know. Doesn't really like my phone too much.
Mm-hmm.
So I turn off echo cancellation, then the crackling goes away. But I think it creates the echo. Then say something.
Something.
You hear an echo?
I do.
Oh, okay. This is gonna be.
There is a suggestion that you should increase your volume a little and perhaps put on your headphones.
Yeah, let's try headphones. I'll put my earbuds in.
Hello, hello. Roboting, crackling. I can't hear your voice if you're speaking. Hmm. Headphones will help, and I wonder if noise suppression will help with the mic gain being too high, causing the crackle. But now we can't hear him at all, but I guess he's adjusting. Okay. Add to stream.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and
Okay.
clear.
Okay, so I think putting my Bluetooth on resolves it.
Yes, yes. And I remember your question about my taking on the position of agnosticism. I think nobody can fault me for behaving as if I believed in my idea. And I'm saying it doesn't really matter whether I believe it or not, because the whole idea is that I am referring to an authority higher than myself. It's not just a bunch of stuff that I made up and people are just going to say, oh, it's only your silly idea, Claire. Why should we follow your silly idea? Why don't I follow somebody else's silly idea? And I'm saying, well, if you believe in God, it's from him. I just have a different interpretation. And then I think most people will, get the idea that if you're going to be following any set of laws, it should be from the supreme creator, the Abrahamic God. And talking to Westerners, you kind of have to mention Jews and Moses and Jesus and, people like that. So it's kind of familiar. It's not literally a new religion with a different story and different characters and different laws. So it it's something
Because
old,
maybe
something new.
maybe this is a little bit of like a crude simplification of what you're presenting, but when I hear that the sales pitch, and I don't disagree, by the way, that these things would help to restore society back to something that I find more favorable. However, there's probably a plethora of different systems you could erect that would help to course correct Western civilization and whatnot. And when you listen to, say, philosophers like argue for God, I've consumed more of these debates on YouTube than I probably care to remember. But it's not only that they present a viable theory that people can agree would be beneficial, confer some kind of benefits on the adherents, but it's that they make considerable efforts to sort of disprove all alternatives to this, and explain why, given, say, some set of empirical facts or logical axioms or something, that no other system could really be the one true one, if that makes any sense. And I don't know if you consider this like a worthwhile labor or a worthwhile effort to try to argue at the foundational level for these things. Does that make any sense? Or
I'm not sure what you're saying. Are you saying atheists are just going to object to it anyway because an atheist would just, be triggered by the idea of theocracy? Is that what you're basically saying?
ultimately, yeah. And I think, again, I made this video the other week, kind of challenging. It's like a quote unquote YouTube atheist, and I don't like the way that the term atheist has been defined in this kind of like mainstream nomenclature. I think that there's a fundamental difference between an atheist and something like what my parents are or what a newborn baby is, to where it's not even that they don't believe in God, it's that they don't have a conception of it. They're like almost thoroughgoing secularists. And that's what most people are. Most people aren't atheists like Chris Hitchens and Dan Dennett. They don't have any uh, necessarily like a belief or conviction that God isn't real. It doesn't, the whole question, the whole dichotomy doesn't really feature in their worldview. Does that make sense?
Well, that could be easily addressed. So you explain what God is, right? I mean, okay, I can imagine a child, who's never heard of fairies or leprechauns or unicorns, and then then you explain, what, and then the child imagines it and probably wants it to exist because it's so, magical and wonderful. And the thing about atheism is that it's an idea subsequent to believing in God. You have to first understand what God is in theory, and then decide God doesn't exist, and then you call yourself an atheist. Um, but I don't think you can, start with being an atheist saying I reject, this thing. You have to know what this thing is after it's been presented to you, and then you say, oh, no, 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 not for me. I don't believe it. But
Sure.
you know, yeah.
I
So I'm sure your parents do know what God is. It just doesn't occur to them to take it seriously, which I think happens because the government is not taking it seriously.
Of course, yeah. These people too, and this is the idea why I may even disagree with you on um the usefulness or the viability of trying to have the mass man even adopt beliefs at all, because post COVID, and we've seen just the way that people come to form their beliefs and stuff. It's just very top down, and it's like they basically get goy beamed by whatever's on their phone, and then that's what they believe in. So I think targeting the message toward people who are more educated, toward people who are more maybe affluent or influential, things like that, that may be the only worthwhile target audience for a message like yours or mine or whose ever in the first place,
Hmm.
if that makes sense, which would be kind of an elitist view.
Well, I think Christianity is there's so much to it, and there's so many different kinds of Christian. I mean, I don't know if you've heard the expression cultural Christian, and then Christian nationalist and believing Christian and confirmed Christian, and there's so many categories of Christian that um, I think it becomes difficult for even Christians to understand themselves as a religious group. And I I do get the impression that a lot of them, want this thing called Christian fellowship, but they fear to discuss anything serious about Christianity or theology because they know that the moment they start taking it seriously, they'll start accusing each other of heresy, and that would be inevitable, really. And and my concern is that Christianity is a religion that actually doesn't do anything. It's just a cultural affiliation. There was actually a Catholic who said to me that, oh, these days a Catholic can be a Marxist and he can be
Of
atheist, and
course, yeah.
you know, uh, yeah, and it's like, well, then he doesn't really believe. But I know lots of Catholic who, don't really believe it. It's kind of like a football club, a sports team or something.
Yeah, I'd love to expand on that.
They
I think that's you're hitting you're hitting on a really interesting point. I think it was Wittgenstein. He argued to some extent that there are no necessary core commitments or beliefs in Christianity. Like, and what I mean by that is there's no essential commitment that one must commit himself to in order to be a Christian. Like, for example, you have non-Trinitarian sects. You have, like, say, Jeffersonian Christians who don't believe in miracles. You have all these different things, and it's like all Christianity comes to be is sort of like a what he'd call a family resemblance of ideas, if that
Mhm.
makes any sense. Like, there's no indispensable one thing where it's like we can pin it down and say you can interpret certain things elsewise, but if you don't commit yourself to this one core aspect of the faith, then you no longer can call yourself Christian. So it's sort of like an amorphous umbrella, right? Like, you could essentially have two people that are both um, self-professed Christians who don't actually agree on anything fundamentally.
Well, yes, yes, because technically a Mormon is Christian, and so is a
Mhm.
Jehovah's Witness, and and
That sect in China who
and what
think
they want to
Jesus
do is
is
not that.
like that sect in China who think that Jesus is like a Chinese woman, and you know what I mean?
I'm not sure. Guan Yin, maybe
Yeah,
is
that's
that the
yeah.
one? I think she's meant to be Buddhist or something. Oh yes, and female deities. I mean, that's another category altogether because well, there's a verse in the Quran saying, stop worshipping these female deities. You don't even like female babies because you infanticide them. So why are you suddenly worshipping all these female deities? But I suppose the purpose of female deities is that men kind of associate them with their mother or some woman that they adore, and this will have the required effect on their emotions.
Hmm.
And I suppose the whole idea of saying no idolatry, God is not man, and you better stop all that kind of anthropomorphism, is to get people believing in a more effective way about obeying the laws. Because I guess if you're Christian and you think Jesus is God, you're not going to be scared of some guy dying on a cross. You just you just wouldn't be scared. But if you think God is, ooh, nobody's ever seen him, and he can do all these, he created the universe and he knows your mind, and then you might be scared. But if you think Jesus is, sorry, if God is Jesus, I just don't think you can get into that kind of mindset to be fearful of such a being. And that might be the problem, you see. Not taking it seriously is the problem, is what I'm
But
saying.
there may be too. I want to go a little bit deeper with this because I think it's not just taking it not seriously, but there may be um, certain types of like doxastic preclusions that prevent people from even being capable of taking something seriously in this epoch, in this paradigm in which we live.
I think you'll have to explain doxastic to
Like
people.
beliefs, essentially. Like it's
Oh, I thought it's sort of you're not sure, but you hope it's true. I thought that was what doxastic means.
the doxa, like a belief. Let's just call it a belief, right? For simplicity, like
Hmm.
there's some that argue, and I found these arguments very compelling. I forget who was the one that really fleshed this out, but the idea was that it was at a certain point in the not too distant past, pre-Darwin, pre-modernity, it would have been impossible to be an atheist. Like it really could not have even the thought could not have even occurred to an individual um to be an atheist. And I know that sounds odd on the face of it, but the argument goes something like ideas are kind of holistic, right? Like any one particular belief or commitment that you have, it sort of presupposes a whole array of background assumptions. And you can't think outside of them. So the concept of God in the past, again, pre Darwin, whatever, it was doing a lot of conceptual labor. Like the entire worldview would have sort of collapsed in on itself without this fundamental notion bearing load, in your like web of beliefs, right? I don't know if
Hmm.
I really argued for that properly. Given the way that you're educated, you're inculcated in the world as a child and things like that, you sort of get brought into a paradigm, let's say, of beliefs, like how we explain reality, how we explain nature, ourselves, our place in it, things like this, birth, death, etc.
Hmm.
After the Darwinian revolution, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to kind of will yourself back into a worldview in which you are unironically committed to these beliefs in these deities as like even you'll listen to apologists like Jay Dyer, for example. They still want to bring in arguments from science, arguments from 20th century logic and things like that to try to underpin their beliefs. Like they kind of play on the tools of modernity. I'll give you one example just to kind of like make this land. I don't think it would be possible for me to think that Zeus, for example, is like the source of lightning when I look out the window and it's a thunderstorm.
Hmm.
I can't even really will myself into thinking of things that way anymore. Whereas at a
Hmm.
certain point in our past, that would have been just intuitive, right? You wouldn't have seen like electrons or whatever, positive charge and things. You would have just seen, God's fighting in heaven, let's say, for example. That wouldn't have seemed ridiculous. But I don't think,
Yes, I mean,
yeah, sorry, I'm kind of babbling about this, but I'll just say, like, this view that I'm presenting here would be a kind of, like David Hume called doxastic involuntarism. So the views and beliefs that we hold aren't really necessarily voluntary. Like I can't just choose to believe tomorrow that the moon is made of cheese. I can't. Like I cannot willingly abandon my own view of what it's made of and adopt this one. There's an
but if you
essentially
lived
physical.
amongst people who believed it, you might be swayed by this group think of these people.
Sure.
if you suddenly found yourself on this, paradise island and with all these natives, and they really believed, it might just kind of rub off you, mightn't it?
Absolutely. And this is why I think that even the thinkers who presented this, like Thomas Kuhn, right? He said pretty much like, when you have two competing scientific paradigms, right? Let's say relativity theorists and people that believe in the ether, like Tesla did. A lot of times the old guard will just go to their deathbed doubling down on the old paradigm, and it's only when people die and the children basically just get told what's the case in education, then you can instantiate like a change in people's world outlook. But it's not that you necessarily can compel somebody with superior argumentation and evidence and things like that, because even the criteria for uh, validity, evidence, warrantability, and things they're kind of interior to the worldview.
Hmm. Well, I think, a lot of people go along to get along. I mean, it's not just, about believing in God. I'm sure there are lots of people who aren't liberal, but they know it's the political orthodoxy of the West. So if they live in the West, if they're an immigrant, or, they'll kind of adopt it to show a willingness to fit in and assimilate into the culture. And I think a lot of people, adopt habits of speech like God bless. And whatever Christians say, or if you want to pretend to be a Muslim, you'll say Alhamdulillah. And everybody has their kind of um, um, you know phrases that they use to show membership of a certain group, and not all of them are sincere. But this just shows you the tide in people will go along because maybe they pick it up involuntarily, or they don't want to be seen to be, you know, going against the tide. And the point about atheism, I would say, is, and how why it was disapproved of, was the idea that, if you really are an atheist, you might kill and steal and do bad things if you thought you would get away with it. So the idea is that if you really did believe that God, the Abrahamic God, exists, then you would be kind of letting him be into your mind to be the thought policeman. So, um, so the idea is that an atheist is less trustworthy than a believing Christian, a believing Jew, a believing Muslim. But the person might not really believe; he just pretends to, in order to be trusted and be given job and marriage opportunities. They don't want to say they're a nihilist, even if they are, or an atheist. So you don't really know. But even that is useful, because once they say, I'm this Hindu or Buddhist, you can kind of look up their religion, learn what they're supposed to believe and what they're supposed to do, and police their compliance with the principles they claim to have. And that's how that's why you use it to predict people's behavior, because once upon a time, employers actually expected you to state your religion or your denomination, even in your job application
That's a
form.
great point. That's a really good point. Um, just to relate some of my own experiences, we went to church when we were young, and I never bought into it. Like when I was very young, I kind of immediately just placed Jesus, and I guess along with it, Abrahamic beliefs in general. I kind of placed them in the Santa Claus box, and I couldn't. Not only did I not find it compelling, I couldn't understand how anybody could. I could not understand how any grown adult could unironically sort of believe in the Christ mythos and all of these things. I couldn't fathom it. And my brother said to me one day when we were much older, he said that he doesn't believe that Christians believe it. Like he thinks it's almost kind of like this concerted lie or something like trying to fake it until they make it. Something along these lines, but nobody living in the 21st century genuinely holds the belief that like Christ died and was resurrected, for example. And only later did I come to find that there was a paper written on this, and it's was written by a philosopher named George Ray. It's the views called meta atheism. So meta atheism doesn't bear on the question of whether or not God is real, right? Like God can be real, yet meta atheism can still hold. And it's the view is simply a kind of doubt or skepticism regarding not the question of whether God exists or doesn't exist, but whether or not people believe this or have the capacity to believe this. Dennett had talked about this as well. Like he called it the belief in belief. And I don't know if any of that makes sense, but basically what I'm trying to argue is that we've fundamentally lost the ability to believe in how should I call it, like religiosity in that way.
I think if the government were minded to make us believe, it could be so easily done through the media. They'll just be planting stories and discussions and whatever, and we'll soon be believing a new story. I really don't think it's that hard. I mean, just by the government saying, right, we want you to believe in God now. And then, the thing is, whoa, I want a government job. I better do what the government says, or I'll pretend to, or, whatever. And then when you start doing it, you might eventually end up believing in it, you see.
I
I mean, if
agree.
it
Yeah,
works
I
for
do
you and you
agree.
like it and it gives you good results, then you will eventually believe in it.
I do agree with that. And I think just going back to the point about COVID, I think there's kind of a silver lining or a bit of like a dark white pill from all of that, which is that on the one hand, people don't really form their beliefs by subjecting themselves to this process of like deep introspection and looking at the evidence and surveying the alternatives. They do kind of just get goy beamed with the new update, but that
Hmm.
may be a good thing as well, because that means that you don't have to do all this heavy lifting of convincing every last lay person and man on the street about the ultimate truth of your beliefs. But I think the current ruling class have a lot invested in scientism. Again, just going back to this case that's in the news, right? Like you can see how psychology is really just a bludgeon. It's really just kind of a weapon of the state. And they try and make psychology appear as scientific as possible. And you see what's happening with like CERN, AI, things like that. They're again denying like the existence of minds in order to make these thinking machines seem more palatable, things like that. So I think you're right in principle, but I think in practice it would be a very tall order to try to convince the people who have the ability to convince the people out of their scientism. And back towards something more, uh, I guess, our religious and archaic and traditional.
Well, it would make them feel better about themselves, right? Because, okay, let me try this line of questioning on you. CD, you'd like to believe that good will be rewarded and evil punished, wouldn't you?
Sure.
Great. So that's it. I mean, if you said no, if you said no, I wouldn't like to believe that good will be rewarded and evil punished, then all kinds of inferences would be made of your answer, that and it would be that you're an evil person and you don't want to be, you don't want your evil to be punished, and because you're so evil you wouldn't want good to be rewarded. So really, if asked such a question, most people will, they'll say yes. They might say, well, only if it's true, or whatever. I think most decent people would say yes. I'd love to believe that,
The,
wouldn't they?
the only problem that I have with this, I would agree that I think that people who behave evil, according to my conception of good and evil, should and ought to be punished, and I would like to see that. However, I don't think that, and this gets into the meta ethics that we were kind of here to talk about. Um, we can't really pin down what evil is, irrespective of social constructs and what people, value and things like that. I think it's ultimately kind of like a social construct. I don't think that moral facts are stance independent. They're not things that we would say are objective or, um, like 2 plus 2s being 4 or something like that. And so what can end up happening is you end up with these split crowds. Let's take abortion, for example, right? I'm very staunchly anti abortion, but it doesn't stem from a religious bent about like the sanctity of life and things like that. Um, because again, I don't necessarily deny like military conscription sometimes, and that's, sacrificing human lives, but I can at least entertain the arguments for pro choice. It's not like there's nothing to them. And so you do really get into this sort of stalemate where it's incommensurable. Like the two combatants in the argument around the ethics of abortion, they have a fundamentally different worldview. They have like a non overlapping uh, ethical belief system. And to try to scrutinize theirs, you're doing it from the perspective of your own and vice versa. And there's no neutrality where you can kind of sit outside of the dichotomy in this kind of neutral place in of arbitration, and you could say like this is the actual fact of the matter that um, the baby's life takes precedence over the mother's or vice versa. Do you know what I mean by that? Like you end up in a situation where it's inevitably just two people talking past one another and there's no means of presenting a tiebreaker.
So you're saying it's just a feeling, you have this visceral feeling that abortion is wrong. Is that what you're saying?
Is that why I uh, reject abortion? Is that why I personally am anti-abortion? Is that what you're asking me?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's, sometimes when we talk about moral matters, somebody just say, well, it's a feeling. You just see this thing and you know it's wrong. or you think of it and
like
you
an
know it's wrong.
intuitionism, like a form of kind of intuitionism. I would strongly reject that for reasons that are kind of, I don't know, maybe pedantic or something. I don't think we have raw intuitions. I think our intuitions are still kind of like rationally or kind of conceptually structured. I don't think like they
Hmm.
used to say like morals are kind of like written on the hearts of man. Like we have an innate sense of right and wrong that we can't necessarily explain or formalize or put to words, but you just
Hmm.
you feel it in your heart or your gut. I don't believe in that. My reasons for being,
It's not enough, even if
well,
it
I don't
does
I don't
exist
think
in
it
many
exists.
people.
I don't even think that that's a thing.
Hmm.
Um like we have this kind of visceral reaction to seeing people get murdered, people, gore and people get tortured and stuff. But I think that what we call like a intuition that that's wrong would not exist in a society where we weren't really brought up to think that that is like transgressive, if that makes sense.
What about killing babies for fun is always wrong? You can agree with that, can't you?
There's sort of like a,
Killing babies for fun, not for any kind of reason that we might try to use to justify it.
what I would say is there's a necessary distinction you have to make when you say like something is wrong. You could kind of mean that in two senses. Like, is it wrong for me? Yeah. Is it wrong for pretty much everybody? Yeah, they would agree that that's deplorable and should be punished, etc. But is there some fact of the matter of the universe that that's wrong, such that if even if everybody on Earth was in consensus that killing babies for fun was okay, they would all just be incorrect because there's some kind of like fact of the universe or something that I don't believe in that. Like I do tend to kind of lean nihilist on meta-ethical questions.
Well, I mean, for if there were a group of people who did believe that killing babies for fun is okay, well, I mean, they would be extinct because they kill all their own babies, and they would become a rapidly aging and shrinking group, and then they would become extinct.
Of
You see,
course.
so from an evolutionary survivalist point of view, it would be wrong because it would mean the extinction of the group.
Of course. But that
Hmm.
I'll push the I think that only just pushes the problem back a step. So the idea of supposing that continued survival of your group or your ilk or whatever is morally good. I think a
Mm.
lot of people might even question this, like for example, anti-natalists or groups like Buddhists who believe the world is sort of something there to just be transcended and ultimately eliminated. It doesn't matter if we go extinct. It doesn't matter if we go out of existence. Things like that. There's a lot of anti-natalists, as I'm sure you're aware, that kind of orbit like at least the spheres that I target
Mm.
my content toward and whatnot. And it's like about proving them wrong. So sure, a society which murdered babies for fun, it wouldn't be sustainable from a survivalist perspective. But they may have some kind of axiom in their ethics where they'll bite the bullet on it and say good, like to hell with survival. And they'll present arguments for why we don't really have this imperative to continue the species or the race or something
Mm.
like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, of course, people can always come up with arguments for to justify what they do, but surely that with religion, the proof is in the pudding. So um, some people have said, well, Jews are evidence of God's existence because look at them, but they're so few, and they have the um, re- most restrictive religion, and everybody hates them and wants to Holocaust them, but they're still around. And these Christians who've acquired 3 global empires, they complain about these Jews and say they're being ruled by Jews. So you could argue that Jews have a special place because, they appear to be indestructible. You see, so you can form a kind of narrative to say, well, maybe Jews are the most high status religious group of all because they've been around for longest and they're so few and they're still around and everybody complains about being their victim. Therefore, you know,
I I
so.
I of amongst the Abrahamic strains, I do have a unique respect for Judaism as I understand it for what they were able to do. And I think it's because it transcends the secular non-secular dichotomy. And they do this by with this sort of chosen people's mythos. They were able to kind of couple this to their race rather than necessarily even to like the biblical laws and things like that. Like you can have the most prominent atheist apologist on earth, Sam Harris, is a
Mhm.
very devout Jew. Like there's no question about that. And there's no
Is he? He's atheist, isn't he? He may be Jewish, but he's a secular Jew, isn't he?
yes, but he's still very much a Zionist. Like he's made arguments in writing and on record arguing that we should preemptively basically nuke strike um, Palestinian um,
Hmm.
Palestinians and things like that because which is kind of funny when you think about it like oh we got to nuke all these people because they're extremists like the kind of the irony
Hmm.
of a statement like that but he's obviously very deeply beholden to Jewish interests despite being the world's most eminent atheist defender. And I don't think that that's contradictory. Like, even just to bring up the fact, like, you can't be an ethnic Christian, correct? Like, that would seem like a very odd turn of phrase to refer to me, for example, Collective Dismal, as like a secular Christian, or
Hmm.
an ethnic Christian rather.
Hmm.
But the Jews view race different. They're not biological; they're genealogical about it. And so, like, I could convert tomorrow to Judaism. There's nobody's going to tell me I can't. But at the same time, because I can't prove any type of genealogical heritage with it, then I have no stake in it. I have no worth to it because it's kind of a caste hierarchy of the blood. That the further back you can demonstrate it goes in your familial line, the more Jewish you are. But the
Well,
cost that they pay for having such an adaptive strategy is that they're parasitic. They don't farm. They don't work with their hands. They don't work in the
well,
dirt.
they're middle class. I mean, that's the thing about Jews, right? They're overrepresented in academia, the professions, and medicine, accountancy. But the thing is, the kind of, well, upper middle class, right? And this is something that, um, I guess, even without Jews, the working classes would be hating on the middle classes and the upper middle classes and the upper classes, I suppose, wouldn't they?
Well, my point was, yeah, I would agree. My point was simply that they don't have the capacity for ultimate self reliance, and that's kind of the trade off that you make by being a sort of merchant class. Like once somebody has procured the land and goods and things like this, then they can come in with their theories and explain how economics works, how commerce and trade ought to work, and they can kind of overlay their theories and whatnot. But they don't have or at least they haven't demonstrated the capacity to actually um, survive. How do I say it? Like procure raw materials for use. That's not what they do. They come in, they exist inside of already functioning societies with industries and trade networks, and then they come in and they suggest like better ways to manage it and things like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, they've been called the managerial classes, but I mean they run restaurants. I mean, I'm sure quite a few of them are plumbers and
Sure.
electricians, and you know, um, but I suppose a lot of it is to do with perception and stereotypes um and maybe just envy that they are the chosen people, and but I suppose maybe quite a few of them are in jail or bankrupt or not terribly successful at all. You know.
My view, I don't think I really I don't think I really worded it right, but the reason why they are able to transcend the kind of secular non secular dichotomy is because if you view yourself like the race becomes your religion and the race is genealogy, then somebody like Sam Harris, right, whether he avows the Talmud or the Torah or whatever, is kind of besides the point. He has presumably a lineage which dates back to these people, and it's the same thing with prophecies. You have these groups within Judaism of which Netanyahu, as I understand, is of this mind where you have to kind of actively partake in bringing about prophecies. And what I mean by that is that you can't take this passive role, but instead you have to actually create the conditions um, for which the prophecies can materialize or actualize. So let me paint a picture here. They complete the Greater Israel project, rebuild the third temple. Um, the prophet comes down and is appointed. You know what I mean? All of the Messiah rather, and we're sitting here deliberating about whether or not a prophecy had actually just occurred in a genuine sense or whether they kind of fudged it into existence. And I think
Well,
at that
there's a
point the question is underdetermined and it becomes a trivial question. This is like Nick Land talked about hyperstitions, to where like they can they can almost retroactively make all of their views, this kind of chosen people narrative, they can make it real. They really can make it real, even if God doesn't exist, even if it was all woo woo. It almost becomes real in a sense because we can no longer determine whether or not a genuine prophecy had just been fulfilled or whether a bunch of human actors had just used the political apparatus to make a bunch of stuff look like it happened. It's a trite question at that point.
Yes, yes, and uh, I think Jews are fetishized. Everybody's obsessed by Jews, and Christians are because they worship a Jew, and Muslims feel they're being victimized by Jews, and Jews themselves are, you know, obsessed about themselves, and some of them are self-hating, and then everybody else is, ooh, the kind of magic and rare, or something of that nature. So there's a kind of mystique that has been imbued, that they seem imbued with, but I think all the power they have has been given to them by Gentiles, and sometimes a Gentile is anti-Semitic, and sometimes they are philo-Semitic, and I think the American Empire has um, an interest in keeping its colony of Israel going. And when I say that, many of the dissident right go ape, because they want to think that the rest of the West is the colony of Israel. But there have been a few views who say, well, actually, Israel couldn't exist without the unwavering support of America,
Yeah,
and
Noam
that's also
Chomsky has
true.
that view.
Yeah. So
Who's
it
also a
maybe it's a
Jew.
kind of so, so it's a kind of symbiotic relationship, when, or you could call it a marriage even. Maybe you will never know in a couple who are married who is really in charge.
Or does it even matter, right? Like, this is sort of, it stems from my philosophical commitments. I tend to be very pragmatic. And I don't, when I say pragmatic, I don't mean that in the colloquial sense of being practically minded. I mean pragmatic in the philosophical sense. Like, pragmatists, they're the maxim that kind of defines the school of thought is that in order to be a difference, it must make a difference. Like, in order for something to be a difference, it must make a difference. And so, again, this is one of those questions like, is America the kind of front, the front for Israel or vice versa? At a certain point, it's like, what difference would it make whether one is the case or the other? Like, there is no sort of difference. It becomes kind of like mental masturbation, or it becomes sort of like a very trivial, a trivial quibble. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't.
Hmm.
Whichever one is the case, it's consequentially irrelevant.
Well, but yes, and also treating any group as a monolith is, I think, always a mistake, because even an individual, um, they probably, oh, you're always late, you never remember my birthday, or whatever it is. There will be some idea of, now, what am I trying to say? So okay, all these Jews, I'm saying they don't think alike. They fight each other. They have terrible disagreements and call each other heretics. And it would be the same as saying, oh, all white people are liberal, because the West is liberal, and there are all these Westerners, and they're all liberal. When obviously, if you live in the West, you will know that Westerners do not think liberalism is the only thing.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, there's two senses in which you can talk. Can you still hear me? Okay.
mhm, mhm.
We can talk about um, people in the kind of token sense, or in regards to a type, like talking about black people in the abstract. When I say black people are like this, right, it doesn't necessarily
Mhm.
pick out any particular black person. You're talking in terms of the class that make up this group. You could
Yes,
really,
but
yeah, sorry, go on.
no, I'm just saying you're so right about the class divisions. Because the people who are there's this expression, the tyranny of small differences. So once upon a time, the working classes would be very particular of respectable poor and indigent poor, and the criminal classes, and they live quite close to each other, and therefore they have to, evolve manners and ways to say, we're nothing to do with that lot over there, even though they live quite near to us, or next door to us, or in the next street. And so, and with regard to Jews, really, we should be able to, get it that Sam Harris is actually, not an observant Jew. And if we're going to be, judging Jews, surely we should be, going for the really observant ones and ignoring the secular ones and even treating them as Gentile. If they're not observant, because they don't deserve to. And obviously the religious ones would be calling the secular ones heretics anyway, which would lower their status.
So uh, I think that's a very salient point. When I said class, though, I was referring almost in like a logical sense, or like class or a set of things, like classification, classificatory, not class in terms of wealth and economic standing. Do you know what I mean? Like the
Hmm.
class of tigers, or class of, like,
You're talking about category rather
categories,
than
like class.
social
I mean
class.
class in terms of like classifications.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
when we speak in terms,
Categorization.
yeah, when we speak in terms of um, of a class, right? If I say,
Hmm.
for example, like, pardon me if it's crude, but like if I say black people are stupid, it doesn't necessarily follow from that if you have, okay, here's an instance of a black person, so therefore he's stupid. Well, no, not necessarily. This is a type token
Hmm.
fallacy, right?
A stereotype.
A stereotype, yeah, but in a more kind of rigorous, this would be like kind of a more rigorous, like, exposition of like how a stereotype falls into a kind of fallacious line of reasoning in logic, or something like that. But
Hmm.
what I was trying the point I was trying to sort of drive home earlier was that I think, given the very nature of the Jewish mythos, it sort of dissolves or collapses the dichotomy between secularism and non-secularism. Because if the religion is that this certain people are chosen, and how they assign membership to this group is through genealogy, it no longer really matters what the person's ideological commitments are at that point. Like, they can be at a gay pride parade with like a leather biker outfit, and they're a Jew. It doesn't really, they still have this claim to membership in this group, and it's demonstrated through their lines that they can trace back to, whichever rabbinical class or lost tribe of their life. Do you know what I mean by that? It's the one religion that can actually sort of accommodate secularism without it being like a flagrant contradiction.
Well, actually, according to their rules, if you break the Sabbath, you're supposed to be stoned to death.
Sure.
So they're not, the secular Jews aren't even supposed to be alive. I mean, that's how strict
But then
their rules
we just
are.
say they're bad Jews, right? We don't say they're not Jews. We say they're bad Jews. That's how I would think of it anyway. I'm not an expert on this,
Or
but I'm just trying to.
non-observant, I suppose, if you're trying to be neutral.
We wouldn't say that violates their Jewishness. We would say that they are, whatever word they use for, like, they would say they're bad Jews.
Hmm.
We wouldn't say they're no longer Jews. Do you know what I mean? Like
Well,
they will
you
still say
can't be an
Jesus was a Jew. They will
ex-black
say
person.
Jesus was a Jew. Jews will say that Jesus was a Jew, right? And I know that you asked D. Michael Jones that the other week or whatever. So it's
Yes, and he
right,
wouldn't
and
answer
they're
properly.
of course, but Jews will say, yeah, Jesus was a Jew. You know, he was a bad Jew. He was a heretical one, and he deserved to be stoned to death. But he deserved to be stoned to death as a Jew who violated these.
Yes, yes, because he was convicted of blasphemy.
Yes, he
Mm.
was a blasphemer, but he was a Jew that blasphemed. They don't deny that he was. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, even amongst Jews, there's this story about, I think it was Brett Weinstein, and
yeah,
and so that there was. We know he's a secular Jew, and then he was talking about his bar mitzvah, and he remembered asking his father that if he could go to Hebrew school as a, you know, to prepare him for his bar mitzvah, and he said his father um, wouldn't let him. Basically, his father wouldn't let him. It never happened, but he did want to do it, and this suggests that actually there are two kinds of thought. The secular Jew wants to be middle class, wants to be assimilated, and wants to, go with the mainstream, and there's these other Jews who disdain to have anything to do with Gentiles, and want to fuss over their food, etc.
but
So
my question is then why do Jews that are in this former camp still have they dedicate and invest so much resources into kind of furthering Jewish interests? Like I'll give you two examples. Stephen Jay Gould, right,
I
and
haven't heard
Sigmund
of him.
Freud. Stephen Jay Gould was a kind of evolutionary biologist, evolutionary psychologist, very eminent. You know, he's up there with somebody like Richard Dawkins, for
Hmm.
example, like very secular scientoid type of guy. But when you look through his kind of academic prowess, like he's featured quite frequently in the Culture of Critique, Kevin MacDonald,
Hmm.
and another guy, Sigmund Freud, right, who everybody's familiar with. Like
Hmm.
he was
Hmm.
not necessarily a religious devotee, and yet you see so much of their scholarship was a lot of times furthering Jewish interests and things like that. They would reject pathologizing Jews, even though they would readily allow that white people can be subject to like deep psychological scrutiny and pathologization and things like that. So why do people like Sam Harris and Sigmund Freud and Stephen Gould, like why are they so devoted to furthering and ensuring like Jewish success and group interests? That doesn't seem indicative of somebody who just wants to walk away from the whole thing and immerse themselves in uh, modernity
Um, I,
with the Gentiles. You know,
well, I mean, Freud, as far as I know, he wasn't an observant Jew, but his ideas are still useful. So I guess Jews are intellectuals. They play around with ideas. They come up with theories, and some of them are useful and adopted by Gentiles. But they are the first people in receipt of divine revelation. Even if you thought, well, it wasn't God who you know gave it to Moses. Well, some Jew must have composed it, if you want to think of it like that. And of course, God is a big, big, big idea, really. And they were the first to make use of it. And of course Christians and Muslims have to say that, I mean, they can't deny the existence of Jews because their religion depends on Judaism too. You know, Christians worshipping a Jew, and you
It's
know,
kind of a brother war, yeah.
yeah. So it's basically kind of supersessionary in that, you know, there were these Jews with their scripture, and then the Christians came along and said, "Oh, your scripture, it's old. Here's our new one, and we put that on top of your Old Testament, and we have a new and different interpretation of your book." And then of course the Muslims come along and say, "Oh, you know, we're the final edition, and you better do things our way." So it's a kind of theological arms race, I guess.
Do you put any weight on Adam Green's theories that the kind of founding of Christianity and then by extension Islam were inorganic in a sense? Like they might have been these diversions that were set up to create like dialectics or something like that. Like they didn't necessarily come about. They're kind of owned and operated by Jews still, and always were. Do you think that um, that has
Um,
any like merits to it, or?
well, I did have a streaming partner who blamed Islam on Jews, which I thought was sort of kind of comical. But I suppose in a way you could do that, couldn't you? Because without Judaism, there would be no Christianity or Islam, and there would be no Zionism, and nobody would call it Zionism. But it's just that everybody's obsessed about Jews and their kingdom of of Israel, and
Hmm.
I guess they'll never get over it because it's to do with this story that's imprinted in the minds of so many people, the Christians and the Muslims as well as the Jews.
I just again, just to kind of backtrack a little bit and try to add a little bit of qualifications to something I was saying much earlier, but I never found any of these religions compelling to me when I was a child at all. I really, and I, again, I didn't understand, and still to this day, I don't understand how people can even will themselves to adopt these beliefs. But when I became older in my, I guess, late teens, early 20s, and I know it's kind of cliche to say, but I discovered Alan Watts and I heard some of his, famous lectures that he gave on the
Hmm.
Tao and things like that. And up to that point, I had been very secular and just sort of go with the flow. Like I did have this innate curiosity about foundational questions, like what happens when we die, what is the nature of infinity, why something rather than nothing. Like I did ask these questions since early childhood, but I had remained relatively secularist. And when I heard him present these arguments from this kind of Eastern philosophical bent, they immediately clicked with me at a very deep level. And again, for years it went on, and I never gave them much thought again. And my education was through a lot of Western philosophy, which is much more secular in nature, much more analytic and whatnot. And not to go on a tangent here, but I surveyed the landscape of philosophy for many years, all of the schools that had gained notoriety, whether it's existentialism, Nietzscheanism, you name it, right? All of these different phenomenology. And when I came across um, pragmatism, it immediately just, again, I had this kind of like a born again experience, this pragmatism. And the more I looked into this kind of commitments of this worldview, the more I started to realize that they did converge on Eastern thought in some very interesting ways. But the problem is that I could explain to you why I've come to adopt a kind of secular Buddhist position, but the arguments would be rather technical, like
Hmm.
arguments against essentialism, arguments against one truth, and things like that. They believe in two truths, things like this, right? Epistemic pluralism, whatever. I realize right away these things wouldn't make sense to a layperson. Not that
Hmm.
I'm some genius, not that I'm some genius, but I understand it wouldn't make sense to my coworkers. Like they may not even have the capacity to ponder the kind of moves I'm making.
Hmm.
And so it does naturally lead to a form of elitism, which is fine because I think that my ancestors, not to pull the whole like pagan pill or whatever, but I do kind of view the Abrahamic religion as a bit of an intrusion into European thought. And um, these schools were fine with the idea of like pedantry, to where Theravada Buddhism was like an elitist movement. It was still sort of drawing on this caste system where only certain people were priestly, only certain people were philosophical. That they weren't trying to sort of like bring the mass man into the fold in the way that Christianity did, in the way that Islam does.
Hmm.
And so I'm fine with that. Like I'm saying that these ideas that I hold, that they're probably too intellectual, and all of the accompanying practices are probably too difficult for the average goy cattle to understand or implement. And that's fine because they were probably never supposed to. Like the line of reasoning that I followed in order to get me to the views and beliefs that I hold today at present, most people simply wouldn't be able to follow. And again, I'm not trying to be like full of myself or arrogant or whatever. It's I'm no professional, but I'm just saying, like, the very notion of trying to like market yourself to like middling people are is I don't even agree with that. That's why I don't like white nationalism, or one of the reasons I don't like white nationalism. I think it's plebeian. I think
Hmm.
it's anti-elitist. Like, do you know what I mean? I don't know if that's just a random
Well,
stream of
I
thought, but
think no, I understand that we should aim for excellence, and but if you're a political activist, you really you need to get as many people as possible to agree with you, and therefore you have to keep it simple, but without losing the idea or the integrity of the idea. And I just don't see how you can avoid narratives, because it is narratives that make us do stuff, right? If we really did believe that there is an afterlife, we would be, doing stuff in this life to ensure that we go to the better place. That's
mhm.
assuming we believe. And we might make sacrifices, and maybe even sacrifice our lives if we thought there was an afterlife that will reward us for our sacrifice. So um, these are, I mean, okay, basically, most of us will not do the right thing for the right reasons. And if we don't think we're going to be rewarded for doing certain things, we're not going to do it. And,
I, I
and so it's a risk reward system.
I sort of want to try to redeploy the concept of sacrifice, because that's kind of integral to every religious system, but it's deployed in a very different way. So if you read, say, the Bhagavad Gita, for example, and you kind of tease out the ethics contained therein, you have this idea of salvation, or soteriology in the Bhagavad Gita. It's being reserved for people who fight, basically combatants. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's this incentive that people have to almost kind of venerate like their fallen enemies, in a sense that you don't find with Abrahamic religions. They have this absolutizing feature of them, like the Jews, for example, seem to just be almost merciless on fallen foes when they kind of take over a society and reshape it in their likeness. It's almost like a kind of endless humiliation ritual of sorts. Whereas, according to, say, like the ethics of war in the Bhagavad Gita, even if you were to slay a foe on the battlefield, you would almost appreciate that, like, they fought for their interests, even though their interests were like diametrically opposed to yours. Pacifism becomes almost like the only sin in town. And so it's just the idea of like victory or Valhalla, right? Like pagan heaven.
Mm-hmm.
You either fight and win, and you gain the fruits of your of war, the whatever it is, gold and riches and women, etc., right? Land, and or you die and you go to warrior's heaven for having
Mm-hmm.
fought. Everybody's a winner when you fight to the death for what you believe in, and the only person who's basically condemned would be like a pacifist, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
This is, in my opinion, right? If we were to convince people of this type of framework, you wouldn't really have the kind of inaction in the face of flagrant tyranny that we find in the West, or in America more particularly, with my guns and 2A Second Amendment, and they don't do shit. And again, it's probably stems from the fact that we're afraid of death. I think this sort of Abrahamic soteriology view is like the final judgment, and things like this. It kind of, people almost get to the point where they think survival is better than death under any circumstances. Like, we have to. Whereas in a worldview where people really believed in the ethics of the metaphysics of war from the Gita, they would just be throwing themselves at their enemies because it's a win-win for them. If they really believe that, they would just literally storm the castle overnight. Really.
Well, I think
Worst
in a
case scenario, they go to Valhalla.
Mm-hmm. But okay, well, the Vikings. I mean, they did have to fight, right? I mean, basically, there was an overpopulation of Vikings, and they were kicked out, so they had to, you know, make their fortune somehow, and I guess that was with raiding and pillaging, but I think a lot of the problem in the West is that it is an aging society. So the average age of the average Western country is 40 and rising. And therefore, the national characteristic of such a nation will be markedly different to if the average age was 20, right? Or
Sure.
so so I think we need to take these factors into account because the whole society changes. Imagine what the government will do to us if the average age was 80. Well, they'll just do whatever they like to us, right? Because they know that we wouldn't be rebelling because we'd be, moaning about our aching old bones and our health care and, whatnot, and Zimmer frames. So people do change according to, what period of their life they're in.
Hmm.
And this is the danger of not having babies or not having enough of them.
I think
Because I don't
hell by
think,
the.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, I'm pretty sure that any nation who has a revolution would have a very low average age.
Hmm. I think hell by the dashboard light's kind of gone further than anybody in following that line of reasoning, and he performs sort of like demographic reductionisms in sociology in the dating market and things like that. So the general view is that when you have a surplus fertility rate, that you have a growing population, it stimulates economic growth, of course, right? Because you're just growing the consumer base. So as he said, like,
You need the labor to do stuff.
and not only that, right? But if there's always more people who are 10 than who are 20, and there's always more people who are 5 than who are 10, you're
Hmm.
growing industry almost like a priori, like it has to be the case. And so it opens up economic opportunities for ease of economic mobility. Like he said, I could just start a pizza shop and it'll instantly be successful over time because there's simply just going to be more people that need to buy pizza, like no matter
Hmm.
what, because you have
Hmm.
more people. It's growing, right? But
Hmm.
I do think that is sort of like it's sort of schematic in nature, like a kind of pyramid scheme where if you believe in the limits to growth, you believe some of the ideas that Malthus presented, like you can't play that game forever. Human populations grow at a exponential rate,
Hmm.
like a J curve.
Hmm.
It's non-linear. So before you know it, in a couple successive generations, we would have 50 billion people on Earth in short order. And at a certain point, you do have to concede to the elites, I think, in my opinion, on their useless eater theory. You do get a lot of useless eaters where they're like, well, we need more people so they can prop up the economy. Well, for whom are they propping up the economy? For more people. It becomes like a vicious circle in a sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, but maybe not create all those useless eaters.
Well, your population control, right?
Well, no, I mean just make sure they're productive citizens and not useless eaters. What, what about
There's
that?
two questions here, right? There's two questions here. I don't want to keep. I know it's late where you are. Are you good? Are you good still,
No,
or
no, I'm happy to carry on.
okay? There's two levels of questions, right? We could ask the question of like, is somebody productive at the local level, right? Like they're a mailman. They can argue, I have to get the mail to these houses. It's a very productive contribution to society. But if you
Hmm.
then ask a kind of macro level question, what is the whole of society? Is that productive? I don't mean this guy and that guy and all the constituent parts, all the individuals playing their role. Is the whole thing taken as a whole? What is it aiming to? What is it striving for? Is it useful? Like, this is sort of like a meta level question. Do you know what I mean? And because we don't seem to have like a telos, like a teleology, an end in mind, a final cause.
Hmm.
It's just this dumb wandering, like what Darwin told us. Uh, Reality worked by a kind of a teleological process of random chance and things like that, which makes like this kind of modernist paradigm. I think that's sort of like the hallmark or the defining trait of it is that it's sort of without teleology, without telos. You could
Telos means purpose, right?
purpose, yeah, like what is the final causation, like what is like a cup, right? Like the final cause, or like its kind of telos would be that it's to be drunk from. You drink from it. That's what it's. But if we ask, like, what is man, right? Okay, so the cup is something that holds water for the purpose of like drinking from. What is man?
Well, the Quran says that humanity was created by Allah because Allah thought um, people might like to worship God and wonder about Him. That
Hmm.
and have the option of eternal bliss or fall into eternal damnation. But maybe just being born and having some time to think about these things is um well considerably better than not having been born at all, you could argue,
Hmm.
if we make the best of our opportunities. And you know
This kind of big three, right? We can maybe call it the theory of evolution by natural selection, capitalism, and technocracy. All of these things seem to have no teleological entailments. They're kind of this dumb wandering of sorts. And so this is why you'll have these people just saying, we just want to play ping pong on Mars. Like it gets to a point where it's kind of ridiculous. You have to step back and say, what are we doing? What are we here to do? Um, what drinking is to cup, man is to what, right? And I don't know enough about Islam. I've not read the Quran, but I know Christian and Buddhist thought tends to almost kind of converge to an extent on this point, is that somehow there's something wrong with nature, right? Whether it's the fall or the fall from grace or the Four Noble Truths, something is wrong. Um, Reality is bad. The material world's bad. Gnostics also have their own spin on this, but we have to get out of it. Somehow we have to transcend this thing. We have to deny the flesh, and along with it, desire. A lot of the seven sins are to do with like gluttony and desirous habits, things like
Mhm.
this, and we have to get out of this somehow. And so they need not even necessarily seek political solutions in order to achieve like a utopia here on Earth, because at the cosmic level, let's say, they think that somehow this has to be gotten rid of.
Well, I mean,
We have to deny the self. We have to deny the self. We have to deny the
mhm.
body.
Well, because it leads us, our appetites lead us into sin. That's the idea. I mean, in Buddhism has this idea that all desire is suffering, or all desire leads to suffering. We suffer when we don't have it. When we finally have it, we fear to lose it. And so I guess all is vanity. But the only thing you can say that all these religions have in common is the afterlife. So, if you can have a better afterlife rather than a worse afterlife, you should aim to have the better afterlife. I mean, that seems logical to me. And in order to do that, you have to follow your religious principles. It's the same in Buddhism too, isn't it? The Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, and everything.
The Buddhist teaching, like Buddhist soteriology, or the Buddhist like concept of salvation, would be that you want to escape this samsaric cycle, like of rebirth, again, right? Like karmic rebirth and whatnot. And in the way that you would realize this is to recognize uh, emptiness in the world. Like things are devoid of intrinsic nature. kind of like say that give the example of like the ship of Theseus,
Hmm.
if you're aware of this, right? Like
If it's all
the
replaced, is it still, the
is it
ship?
still the ship, right? And then
Hmm.
you have to kind of quest for like discovering the essential properties. Like, okay, if everything is interchangeable and we are still able to call this thing the same, what are the essential properties that are indispensable to the identity of a thing? And Aristotelians, for example, they'll do a lot of metaphysical heavy lifting to defend an essentialist view, but Buddhists will just bite the bullet on it. They'll say there is no, like what they would say, svabhava, or like no intrinsic nature to anything. And you can play this game all the way down. Like you can look at the board of the ship and say, if I saw a little bit off the end of it and I sanded and painted, etc. Like all it is the relations. They would call like codependent origination. So imagine like two planks of wood that are standing up, but they can only stand because they are leaning on one another. You can't really remove one or else it falls down. This would
Hmm.
be like codependent origination, right? Like all things are co-instantiated by everything else. There's no thing in itself that underlies the relations which it's in. Like, um,
I'm not sure I
act,
understand.
so the ship of Theseus is empty. Like it's not real, right? It's
Hmm.
just a bunch of parts. Like this is what it actually is just the sail, the mast, the propeller,
If it's
what it's just these things.
recognizably the ship of Theseus, then I guess it's a ship of Theseus, right?
Exactly, but it's arbitrary. Like the stopping point is ultimately arbitrary. Like the exact same they call these like Sorites paradoxes. Like how many grains of salt make up a pile? Like when is it appropriate to call um, it a pile? And so you perform this like recursive function, like add one, and there's no non-arbitrary boundary around this. And so you realize like it's sort of just it's imaginary in a certain sense. We kind of just agree at a certain point, and
Hmm.
that's good enough. But the problem is that if things are let's say this ship again, right? If it's just an amalgamation of a bunch of parts, but we don't perceive it that way. I don't see, when I look at a car, I don't see tires and a windshield. I see a car. That's like the mode of perception that we exist in. And it
It's an
causes us to,
impressionistic perception. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. So,
it, it, it,
so
it presents to us as a car, not as the wheels plus the axle and plus the brake line,
mhm.
right? And so
But we as individuals have, I mean, it's been said that our cells have all been replaced, and obviously, we, when we were children, are, well, unrecognizable as older individuals, and we might not even recognize ourselves in our photographs.
agreed. And this is why they would go so far as to apply the same scrutiny to the self,
Hmm.
much like David Hume did, right? This is the idea, and what kind of sets Buddhists apart from Sanatana Dharma is the disagreement about atma or anatma, like the idea of a self, because they would apply this. They would bite the bullet on what you just said, right? Like there is no such thing as me, the person. It's sort of like a transitory identity. Every single thing could be swapped out and replaced, and you find like there's no permanence to it at that point. But because reality presents itself to us, um, gestalt, like I don't see the sail and the I don't actually perceive that a boat is just a sum of parts. I see it as it like a gestalten, like it is the boat. We kind of seek permanence, and this always by necessity leads to suffering or dukkha,
Hmm.
disappointment and things like that, because there's a
Attachment, yes.
attachment, and
Yeah.
then you realize these things are fleeting, right? And it's not, they're fleeting because they were never things, they were never like concrete. We kind of reified these things into existence, like we confused a map for a terrain, and then it ultimately proves to be dissatisfactory when these things vanish out of existence, and you realize they were empty in the first place, this shunyata. And so they would say everything, if everything exists relationally and nothing has essence or nothing has intrinsic nature, then everything is empty. Form is empty. And so once you realize this, you're on the path to liberation. And eventually, hopefully, if you can, you know, through certain practices or through certain deep internalization of this notion, you eventually realize like you are nothing, and you escape from this, like you would achieve nirvana or bodhi, right? Like
Hmm. But
Christians have a very similar notion in their, like, I think another thing, going back to a much earlier point, I think that Christians don't really understand the concept of dying to self. They want to take, like, this is why I think even like Christian nationalism is arguably oxymoronic in a sense, because when you are a Christian, you kind of are nothing else. Like it's not, you say, it's not a predicate of a subject, like, oh, I'm a Christian and I'm tall and my favorite color is red. It's not that type of a thing. They'll say, in the Bible, what is the passage? Every day I die and I'm resurrected, but it is not I who am like born again, but Christ who's born through me, or something. Like you're actually supposed to die. Like this is why they'll use the term reborn or born again. Like when you become Christian, to properly do that, like you're dead. You're not Claire anymore. That person's, you're Claire in name only. That person died. That person you were before it doesn't exist.
hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, I guess the idea is that we turn over a new leaf. That there's this expression, and we hope things will be better after we turn over a new leaf.
But your concerns with the state of the world, in my opinion, I have a very high bar for what a Christian would have to do for me to take them seriously. But I think all matters of worldly affairs ought to sort of cease if you really take Christianity seriously. Like your kingdom is not of this earth. There's no point for fighting for American trade policies and things like it. Doesn't even make sense at that point.
Well, Christians used to, go on crusades and fight the
I'd say they
European
were
wars
wrong.
of religion, and now they've gone all, pacifist and meek and mild. But then you could say that they're also starting a third world war because they're so warlike, and they're probably the most warlike people in the world because they have, you know, their global empire. So,
I think they ought to be pacifists. I think they ought to reject the political.
well, some of them are. The Mennonites are pacifist, and so are the
Mhm.
Amish and Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, all of the Anabaptists, they seem to be the most pacifistic, the Hutterites and men, as you said, Mennonites and non-confrontational things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I guess we went really like far afield from the point of the conversation. I just to bring it back to that, I would just say that I think because so many people have such a kind of high epistemic bar now, you may, if you want to be as convincing as possible, you may have to play philosophy with all the pedantry that comes along with that, the meta ethics. You can't just necessarily argue that your views will work and be in the benefit of people and things like that. There's a like a greater expectation for palatability.
Well, I mean, of course, people are going to hate. Christians are going to hate being told that their religion is no longer working, and ditto liberals. And I don't know if you know that Dugin wrote his book, the fourth political um, theory, and it was him basically saying. The first political theory, liberalism, no longer works. The second political theory, nationalism, doesn't work. And the third political theory, communism, doesn't work. And we need a fourth one. It's that kind of idea, isn't it? And the thing is, he hasn't really worked it out. And I'm basically saying these secular political ideologies have been attempts to replace Christianity. And people don't know that. Um, I guess Westerners would think, oh, our religion is Christianity, but I'm saying it's really liberalism, and they're both not working properly, and I guess there will be some kind of sentimental attachment to these two ideologies that will be um, thought of as being totemic of being Western.
Mm-hmm.
And for sentimental reasons, they will cling to it even though it no longer works. And I'm saying, it's like a death in the family. So, somebody's, you know, died in the house. Something needs to be done. You can't just let the corpse decompose. You have to call the undertakers. You have to sign the death certificate. You can't just, not acknowledge it. And this is a role for historians, of course, but um, when you talk to Christians, I don't think they really believe. They just hold on to their Christian identity because, well, it's the only identity they know. If they want to go back further than liberalism, and I'm saying, well, something better has arrived. It's been around for 1400 years, and you don't have to convert. You just use a legal system, and of course it's going to be very hard to accept. I know that, and and I hope it won't. Well, obviously, me talking about it to various people is not going to work. It would only work if um, the powers that be decide to talk about it on their news their media outlets. But I
If
guess
they go
they
media,
want to use
right?
Christianity because people are easier to control if they use Christianity. They won't know their rights as much as they will if they were Muslim, because then they would read the Quran where their unalienable rights are, the full list of the unalienable rights described, mentioned in the Declaration of Independence is in the Quran. Because the First Amendment
Yeah,
is actually supported by the Quran, as I never tire of telling people that.
I think I tend to use the term liberalism as almost sort of synonymous or interchangeable with the Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in order to kind of understand like our place in the current decline or malaise of society, it's important to understand like what that looked like and what they got right and what they kind of whiffed on. The idea, as I understand it, was largely the idea that man is endowed with these innate faculties to either reason or uh, observe the results of experimentation. So you no longer have to mediate your beliefs with clergymen or holy men or religious texts. We can go out and through experiments we can kind of prod nature, we can poke at her, and it by doing so, like Ben Franklin with a key on a kite in a rainstorm, like we
Mm-hmm.
can learn something about nature that is, in theory, it's accessible to any man, woman, or child, right? Under the right conditions, we can discern certain laws
Mm-hmm.
about nature, and this sort of undermines the authority of religious institutions, religious leaders. All it leaves left is maybe people who've done more due diligence than you. Like instead of a priest, you have a pastor, and he's not endowed with any kind of special powers to override your scriptural interpretations, let's say, but maybe we can defer to him simply because he's dedicated more time to this, but he doesn't have ultimately more access, and so it leads to a kind of like runaway individualism. You have like Kant, right, arguing that man is endowed with these transcendental categories of reason and things
Mm-hmm.
like that, and so you've thrown away the need for hierarchical like mediation in shaping the views of mass society. But the problem is that I think we found out at this point that science isn't what we thought it was. Empiricism is deeply problematic. Even a lot of scientists will argue this case. There's a lot of uh, knockdown arguments against the merits of empiricism, logic as well, right? Like in the 20th century, we began to turn the gun on itself with using logic to scrutinize logic.
Hmm.
Um,
But
and,
don't
and
you
so we're in
think?
this situation, just to like finish this very long-winded point. Um, we're kind of in a situation now where we can't just do a rewind and go back to whatever we had before the Enlightenment and science and modernity. But at the same time, we're finding out that, for reasons I could go further into, but that science is kind of just another, meta narrative, but it's unique. It's a unique type of one.
Well, I would argue that science and philosophy are two different branches of knowledge. So, I mean, science has nothing to say about whether God exists or not.
The thing is that, like, if I say that to you that I know God exists, right, and you're an unconvinced skeptic, but you have a lot of charity, you're very open to listen, you're very open to being swayed, but you don't just grant you don't just grant my claim, right? There's some burden of proof that I owe to you here.
Hmm.
Let's look at the possible ways I have at my disposal to try to convince you. I can essentially use like uh, empirical argument, like fine tuning, evidentialism. I could say, this is impossible that reality can exist on this rock. uh, because the fine tuning of it all would have to be such that it's just almost impossible without God, and that's the best explanation. Inference to the best explanation, God exists, right? Or you could say that there's some kind of logical a priori argument that you could put here, like a presuppositionalist, right? Like they say, you can't have, in order to make any kind of like assertoric claims, like you're asserting something, this is the way things are, right? You have to sort of presuppose that you can have knowledge, and that it kind of bears on truth and things like that, and you can't account for this necessary substrata without presupposing God. Something like this, right? But in
Okay,
my opinion,
here's a
yeah, sorry, go
syllogism,
ahead.
which is we are here because there was a creation. Because there was a creation, there must have been a creator, and that creator must have been the Abrahamic God who has sent two messages, as far as we know, to us, the first and the final. So it's
The thing is,
presuppositional.
sure, but the problem is that you have philosophers, logicians, mathematicians, scientists, right? These type of like heterodox thinkers that are very eminent, brilliant people of immense genius, and they're making moves now and have been for like 100 years. They're making these conceptual moves that like that certain logicians will accept valid contradictions, let's say, right? They're called dialethians. They'll say that something can be both true and false, certain things, which would collapse the entire. It would cause a kind of cascading effect that would implode your entire logical system if it permits or grants that certain contradictions can be valid. Yet these guys are smart. They know how to anticipate that move. They can devise an entirely alternative non-classical logic that is able to accommodate valid contradictions without sacrificing coherence, internal coherence, for example. Or you'll have people that say, like John Searle, right? They deny the principle of sufficient reason, the PSR, which is that everything must have a cause. And they'll argue for brute fact. There's I forget the guy's name. He's a kind of pop physicist. He's very popular. Um, his name's right on the tip of my tongue. He denies the principle of sufficient reason as well. At a certain point, it's like you don't even have the tools to really disprove. You can present your syllogism as you just did, but they may say, "No, I don't agree that everything had a cause. Some things just are. They're brute facts. They don't warrant any kind of further explanation." Or some people, Claire, will argue like they'll bite the bullet on infinite regress, right? So like turtles all the way down. Um, A explains B, or sorry, B explains A, C explains B, D explains C, etc., ad infinitum. Some people will say that if an argument leads to infinite regression, then it shouldn't be accepted. But other people who are smarter than everyone in the chat combined will make this really crazy move and say, no, it's okay. I'll accept that. And they'll make extremely extravagant arguments to defend these things. Like
But
logic
if they're not
itself,
understood, if they're not understood, then how can they persuade if they're not even understood?
because they'll say, I don't even play within your game. Like I don't accept Aristotelian logic. I have a totally different logic, And why is yours better than mine? Maybe you should come over here and play my game, right? And it almost becomes this, I don't know, like a kind of pragmatic thing. Like, you, I don't know how to explain it except to say that logic itself sort of ripped itself apart. And science, because it rests atop logic, it came apart. Epistemology, by the end of the 20th century, epistemology imploded. We don't know how to move forward anymore. Postmodernists, pragmatists, they dismantled everything. There's
Well, I
nothing
think
to there. Yeah,
it can be reconstructed because they offer nothing other than destruction of ideas that used to work. I mean,
but
we
the
don't look
moment you,
for deconstruction by
mhm.
nihilists and atheists, do we?
But you'll have this distinction between thinkers. Let's say there's destructive and constructive philosophers. So Nietzsche, for example, he famously said, "I do philosophy with a hammer." So he came out and just launched an onslaught against Kant, the Stoics, everybody that wasn't him. And he just left it at that. I mean, he did somewhat construct a metaphysics, but there's not much there. David Hume, an even better example, right? He just said, we have no we have no warrant to accept that causality exists. We have no warrant to think the past will be like the future. Inference goes out the window. Everything's gone. Fuck it. It's all. And again, he kind of constructed a bit of a theory with his bundle theory, but um, Wittgenstein, another example, like, not a constructive thinker. He was there to sort of rip apart and delegitimize everything that existed prior to this. So, and I think those guys tend to win. I think those guys tend to be able to sort of shit on and knock down people who are actually offering like a Weltanschauung, like a worldview, a system. The systematizers. They end up kind of getting beaten up by these like more deconstructive thinkers.
Do you really think so? I mean, you can imagine a rabbi arguing with such a philosopher or an imam. Um, these people, with their religion, can present a story that is appealing if you're of the mind to want good to be rewarded and evil punished. And you could construct an argument about, well, we if we followed God's laws, we would be more likely to get to heaven, and we if most people believed in God, then they would be more likely to obey the laws that we have if they're from God. Why don't we try? They might say that. And
Sure.
how would you know you never tried? Stop being such a negative Nazi.
Yeah. I think again, not to nitpick too much, and but it's a lot of people would probably argue that something being better for like achieving goals, for example, doesn't necessarily bear on the truth of it. Like, when we look at evolution, there's a whole rich school of thought now in philosophy of mind. Illusionism is the idea that, say, the mind isn't real, or it's not as it appears to us to be. And the reason for this is that what's true isn't necessarily what is conducive to survival. Sometimes falsities or illusions or misconceptions can incidentally facilitate um, reproductive success. And so now we find ourselves in a situation where um, we have all of these notions, we have all of these perceptions and things like that that don't actually reflect the way reality is in itself. This is why we're very susceptible to illusions, right?
What do you
Like,
mean? Like maybe suicide? People think life's not worth living, but then there is a holy book that says don't kill each other and don't kill yourselves. So that would be helpful, I
sure,
suppose.
and suicide, and that's an interesting question, because suicide is not suicide rates are not evenly distributed between different races and cultures. It features so prominently in, say, Japan, as opposed to in, I don't know, Iraq. I'm gonna assume the latter, like that, you know,
You
and
probably
what are
can
the
get
underlying reasons for
statistics
this?
on
Because
a.
I'll tell you. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying if you wanted to, I can look it up. Do you want to look up the
Well,
country with the
just
highest
just a
suicide
kind of
rate?
off the cuff example, but I'll give you an example here. It's a very hard point to make, and I've been trying to sort of like nudge the conversation to where I can articulate this better. But Julius Evola,
Hmm.
he said that we should not think of kamikaze pilots, i.e., the Japanese suicide bomb
Hmm.
pilots, as having committed suicide. Because in our worldview, in our paradigm, it does make sense to view it that way. We would say cause of death suicide, right? The guy flew his plane into a navy vessel. He committed suicide. But in their worldview, from their perspective and their understanding of their actions and what they meant, um, that's not what it is. Like, if they have a very different conception of
It was
life, they have a
martyrdom.
very different conception.
They were
Martyrdom,
heroes and
or
martyrs.
let's say, for example, right, and this is just like way out in left field, but let's say these people don't believe in the idea of self for some of the reasons we just went into, right? They don't believe, they believe they're a ship of Theseus. They're like a wave on an ocean, but the wave isn't real. The wave is just, it just melds back into the ocean, and it gets kind of reassembled, and it's reincarnated again as is the new wave, etc. If they believe that, then they don't really believe that they're killing themselves, as there's nobody to kill. Like, who are you killing? Right? And so we have certain presumptions about how to interpret the actions, beliefs, things like this of cultures which are like non overlapping or incommensurable with our own. And we can't perform those types of analysis externally on other groups. Like, we can only do that internally and within our own, like an internal critique, but it fails when we try to extend our notion of what suicide is to a Shinto. Do you understand? It just utterly fails, because their entire belief structure frames that action in a very different light. It has a very different meaning that may not even feature in our kind of Western pseudo Christian idea, right? Does that make sense? Like, you can't even necessarily say that they've committed suicide. That might be incoherent,
Well, I mean,
or just
I've
very
heard of this
biased.
expression, it's a suicide mission, in terms of the Western military. I mean, there's this movie, what was it, the 300, about the Spartans defending themselves against.
Mhm, yeah,
Yeah, so, it's not unheard of.
but they may not even believe in death. they may not even believe in death. They might think that that's a fallacious concept. Like you take the notion of death for granted, but it's not exactly obvious that that's the only way to interpret what transpires when the vital signs stop.
Well, the idea of the
Do you know
immortal
what I mean?
soul has been around for, well, mm,
Sure. Or immortality and absence of a soul, right? Like that's another thing. Like the denial of the existence of a soul almost necessarily leads to commitment to immortality and reincarnation without the transmigration of souls and things like that. So they may. I don't know anything at all about Shintoism, but it's just like it may not even be fair to impose our categories onto cultures that they're incommensurate with.
mhm,
Like you may just have to take them at face value.
mhm,
Do you know what I mean? It's like, do you speak any languages besides English?
yes, a bit of
Okay,
Mandarin,
what if you don't mind me
a
asking?
bit of Mandarin,
Do you know
a
Mandarin?
bit, yeah.
Okay, so there are concepts in Mandarin because I'm trying to learn Mandarin a little bit right now, and one of the difficulties is that because it has a very different like philological history that doesn't overlap really, to my knowledge, with like Indo-European languages. There are aspects of that language which are just quite literally inexpressible in English. You can't. There's no bridge where I can take that concept and express it in English terms. It doesn't go.
Mhm.
The only way to ever come to grasp it is to sort of do it from the inside.
Yes,
Do you know what I mean by
yes,
that?
because if you want to literally translate the Chinese word into English, it will just sound, well, really quite comical. If it was a literal
Exactly.
translation word for word, it would sound quite silly.
And it just may not even go, right? The way they couple certain notions together and things like that. Now, take that idea that I just gave you and hold it, and now apply that to like political metas rather than languages. There could be certain aspects of like Eastern or Eastern religion or secular atheism or whatever, which just literally cannot be understood in the Islamic worldview. They just can't possibly be expressed in that meta.
Um, well, most people speak English now, so even Muslims, so I suppose they can get it. Mhm.
Sure. I don't mean I don't mean linguistically. I mean just purely kind of conceptually. Like we cannot understand
Could you give an
the
example?
idea of. I would probably restate the example of like kamikaze pilots. Like we just probably can't understand
I think we can really that they
from
were.
the outside.
I mean, you can say that they were, silly for doing that, or you can think, well, if you were Japanese and you thought, well, they were heroes and martyrs for doing that. You could think that
Let me
if you were, for the the Japanese Empire, and thought it was a good thing.
let me try to reiterate. Let me try to reiterate. Right, like when we classify something as a suicide, um, there has to be this idea of awareness of what, like if somebody accidentally crashes a plane, that's not a suicide. Even if he crashed a warplane into a
Hmm.
navy vessel, that's not a suicide, right? Unless he intended to do that and then he knew that that was going to result in his death.
Hmm.
But the concept of death is not unitary. Like it's been interpreted in a vast number of different ways by different cultures in different times, different systems, depending on your notion of the afterlife, depending on your notion of things like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're just very stuck on this tendency to impose our framework um, on other worldviews in this way. It leads to a kind of like universalism that I think it leads to a sort of universalism that I don't particularly like. Like I do promote, um, not for any individual, because I know the law and I know, I'm smart and I think about what I say, but in theory, just as a purely like philosophical excursion, I do think that um, it's noble to do that at some point in your life. I think everybody, almost without exception, should probably die by their own hands at a certain point. Um, and that's evil. Like you can get banned on YouTube for me saying this. Like you might have to take this down. That's very evil to say in our like moral in this,
Maybe you're
But
saying
to me
that,
it's
there are
very
some
to me.
principles that are to die for. Maybe you're, and this is what martyrdom is about, isn't it? That you're going to die for a principle. You know, people can't get their heads around it, but that's actually what principles are for. Because if you only do something because you're rewarded, you're just being bribed to do that thing, right?
Mhm. This was Evila's distinction between the higher and the lower war, which was basically jihad being the higher war, and like being a mere mercenary is the lower war. You're like a paid employee of the military industrial complex. You don't actually you don't believe that the values that you're fighting for in Afghanistan transcend your family, yourself, your person. You're not willing to sacrifice your kids for it. You're not willing to sacrifice, you know, because you really believe that the ideals that you are fighting for transcend anything that's of like that's personally beneficial to you, materially or otherwise, right? This is like a
Well, joining
jihad,
the
like higher
army
war.
could be martyrdom, right? Joining the army, you might be, you might die in battle. Is that a suicide occupation?
Well, there's a lot of different directions we could sort of take this conversation off in. I think now you see these fentanyl zombies in like every major city in America and Canada. It starts to blur the line between whether or not this is suicide or not. Like when somebody dies from a drug overdose, but the drug is that powerful and they're taking it. Um, that's like a slow death. Is that a suicide, right? Like it
Hmm.
starts to even the very notion of like where suicide starts, where suicide ends, and just not taking good care of yourself begins is like a fuzzy line, right?
Hmm.
If you're 500 pounds and you smoke a pack of cigarettes a day and
Hmm.
shoot heroin, then it's like we don't conventionally deem that a suicide. But I mean, where's the line there, right?
Well, Roman generals were expected to fall on their swords, and samurai were expected to kill themselves rather than be captured by the enemy. You know.
But the book that you tried to have people um, adopt by your I haven't read it, but by your own words in this stream, you say it strictly forbids that. Is that correct to say?
It, yes, I suppose it means a kind of suicide, like, oh, well, my spouse has left me. Oh, I'm feeling depressed. I'll never get. I think it's that kind of thing.
But there's an
Uh,
exception made for jihad. Would you? I don't know
yeah,
because I
because
know a lot
jihad
of
is
Muslims.
actually
I know a
it's
lot
a
of
religious
Muslims interpret.
obligation.
Sure, and I don't know what. I don't
But
know
it
how
can
the
it, it
different.
can take the form of joining the army,
This
or
is a perfect
just a
example.
verbal jihad. Like,
Okay,
well, you
let
should say something. You should just say something because it's so
sure,
disgusting and
but
shocking.
what I'm gonna say, and again, I don't know how the various sects and Islam break down and which you subscribe to, and all it doesn't matter. We'll set that aside for a minute. Sunni, Shia, whatever, right? But um, on the one hand, there's a strict like forbiddance of taking one's own life, but then
Hmm.
on the other hand, they would not consider, and Ivola talks about this in the Metaphysics of War. He strictly dedicates a chapter to Islam and how to understand jihad if you ever get time to listen to it. But it's almost like this is kind of excluded from that classification. Even though a materialist, like a Western atheist materialist, they would just say, a suicide bomber, that's a suicide, like period. It's in the name. They would say, no, no,
Hmm.
no, we're not. That's not how it's to be understood because in our worldviews, taken as a whole, the mere termination of one's life by one's own hand doesn't necessarily always constitute a suicide if it's in service to jihad or some type of other. There's exceptions made here, and there's a different type of. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, so it's a thin line, right? A high risk mission or a suicide mission. Sometimes we can't really make the distinction.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, I would agree. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to go over quickly.
Well, what I was trying to explain, well, to you and to anyone, is that clarity of narrative is important, because if people don't even understand what you're saying, then you you won't be able to, well, you're further from persuading them. But if they understood what you said, but they don't like it, that's better than not being understood at all,
I agree.
you see. and
I
and
very much
if they
agree.
so don't like it that they lost their temper and whatever, it actually means that they heard it and reacted badly to it, than if they were just not reacting. So um yeah, I mean,
And
okay, that's how I choose to interpret bad reactions. That is better than no reaction.
in my view, I go so far as to say that I don't even care about agreement. I just want almost kind of like the discursion as an end in itself. And
Hmm.
in order for that to be done, I need to be understood
Mm.
properly. I
Hmm.
need to be I don't need to be agreed with. I
Me
just
too.
need to be understood properly so that it can facilitate the conversation. Like, you don't agree with me, it's fine, whatever, right? But the conversation, you understand what I'm
Hmm.
saying, and
Yeah,
so
because
the conversation can ensue and it can be done properly. And that in and of itself
exactly.
is the goal for me, is this kind of discursion, uh,
Hmm.
like interlocution, whatever, this back and forth dialogue between people.
Hmm.
I can't. My mother, she's always saying that you just need everybody to agree with everything you say, and I almost want to like flip out because that's the opposite of what I want. I just want um, you to not strawman me, basically, and to
Hmm.
understand. But she can't get her head around it, and a lot of people don't. It's like, no, no, you're,
Well,
you're
you
trying to
you
bend
could.
me to your will. No, not at all. Not at all.
Well, on YouTube, there are lots of content being produced, and the people talking appear to be having a conversation, but what they say has nothing to do with what the other person just said, and
Oh yeah.
it's very frustrating and very annoying. And when people don't agree with you, that there should be, well, three responses. Well, okay, you've just heard something. You either agree with it or you don't. And if you don't agree with it, you have to say why, and then the conversation continues, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that is how I assume these things would work. But but
And
but, but
this is the pragmatist move, is that, and it comes from Wittgenstein, where they literally said that the goal of philosophy isn't even what we had thought it was for thousands of years, because what we took philosophy to be doing was to be trying to get at the truth of ultimate reality, or something like what Richard Rorty called like the mirror of nature. We're trying to use philosophy to somehow understand like this fun,
ourselves.
ourselves, nature, which we are a part of, all this. And Wittgenstein says, no, no, no. This the entire um, the entire program, I guess, of philosophy is therapeutic, meaning it's sort of meant to like mediate between people where conflicts and problems and confusions arise. It almost serves like a kind of social function of like mediation, deliberation. It doesn't actually get at something called like the truth or reality with a capital R.
I think
So,
it's really to discover what we think, what we ourselves think, because most people, they have no idea what they believe or why they believe it.
mhm.
It's
Th-
laughable, really.
this is where like me and Sigma were doing a lot of works to try to like not necessarily like bring about a certain conclusion in people, but to just sort of teach people how to engage with like discursive practices the way you and I have been on this, right? Like, because you're right about this weird disconnect, not to pick on them too much, but with Irish people, um, like anytime I'll go into like a predominantly Irish voice chat on Telegram, it seems at first like there's a conversation happening or ensuing here. But after listening for 20, 30 seconds, you realize nobody's talking to each other. Like one person will say something, as you said, and then another person responds, but it's not even like tangentially related. It's just like, what the fuck did what you just said have to do anything with what she said? And they
Mhm.
just carry on like this all the time. Like they just go through life like this. They're not even talking to. They're responding, but they're not engaging. Like it's just.
Yeah, yeah, it's terrible. I remember watching it, I think it was on RT, and there was this journalist, and he had a list of prepared questions, and he basically didn't care what the answer was. So he wasn't responding to the answer. He just
Mhm,
asked the next question, and it was the most, well, the dullest interview that I ever saw. He
mhm.
really just lost interest in it, very early on.
But yeah, I don't know. We should have more of these chats. It's,
I'm always here. So,
all right.
and we're on Telegram. I'd love to have another chat soon about these things, and I think it's yeah, very helpful.
I gotta fix. I think I gotta get a new phone because I just bought this phone not long ago. But when I was in China, the electrical outlets over there are 240V, and
Oh,
they're twice as powerful as the ones here.
oh, you think you
And
might have overcharged it or something?
oh yeah, like I would put my phone would be on like 8%, and I would plug it in. I would go for a cigarette, and when I came back, the thing was at like 95%. But
Oh,
it would be molten hot. Like I mean, the thing would be almost steaming, right?
uh,
And now my device is like, I don't know, like this whole conversation we've been having, like the thing's been like pretty much melting.
Oh dear.
And I don't
Okay.
really use the computer very much. Like I'm kind of, I'm
Hmm.
too ADHD. I gotta be up and, in my
Hmm.
car and here and there
Hmm.
in order to
Hmm.
like think properly. So I don't know. I'll resolve this, and then maybe, yeah, we'll
Yeah,
get another chat scheduled, grab another topic, and we'll.
that would be great. That would be great. So, well, thanks again. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and um, I hope it will take place before too long.
All right, well, let's make it happen.
Okay.
All right, take it easy. Bye for now,
You
Claire.
too. Bye.